The Webb family estate looked like something out of a magazine that evening. Twinkling lights strung through the old oak trees, white linen tablecloths catching the golden hour sun, and 63 guests scattered across the manicured lawn with champagne flutes in hand. I remember counting them. 63 people who would witness what came next. Marcus had warned me his mother could be difficult. He'd used that word specifically, difficult, the way people do when they're trying to soften something much worse. But I'd faced difficult before. I'd faced engine fires in the South China Sea. I'd faced 18-hour rescue operations with 0 sleep and lives hanging in the balance. I thought I could handle Patricia Webb. I was wrong about that, not because she was stronger than me, but because I had made myself vulnerable in a way I never allowed at sea. I had let my guard down. I had wanted her to love me. The engagement party was her idea. She'd insisted on hosting it at the estate, insisted on handling every detail, insisted that Marcus and I simply show up and enjoy ourselves. I should have recognized the strategy. In the Navy, you learn to read tactical positioning. You learn when someone is setting the battlefield to their advantage. But I wanted to believe she was trying. I wanted to believe that after 6 months of subtle jabs and cold silences, maybe she was finally accepting me. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table as his mother stood up to give her toast. He was nervous. I could feel it in the tension of his fingers, the slight tremor that ran through him. He knew his mother in ways I was still learning. Patricia Webb stood at the head of the table in her cream-colored Chanel suit, champagne glass raised, smile perfectly arranged. She was a beautiful woman, I'll give her that. The kind of beauty that comes from a lifetime of being told you deserve everything and believing it. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my son and his friend, she began, and I felt the first prick of warning. Not fiancé, not future daughter-in-law, friend. When Marcus first told me he was seeing someone from the Navy, I have to admit I wasn't sure what to expect. I pictured, well, you know how those military types can be. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Marcus's grip on my hand tightened. But Elise has been a surprise. She's softer than I expected, quieter. Patricia's eyes found mine across the table, and her smile sharpened. I do hope marriage will help her settle down a bit, find some real direction. I know how those boat hobbies can be, all that time away from home, all that need for attention and adventure. But I'm sure once she has a family to focus on, she'll find what she's really looking for. Aunt Denise laughed too loudly from 3 seats down. The sound was like a signal, permission for others to find humor in my humiliation. A few more guests chuckled uncertainly. To Marcus, Patricia continued, raising her glass higher, and to hoping his little Navy friend finds her way to calmer waters. She never asked what I did out there. She just assumed she already knew. I sat perfectly still as glasses raised around me. My training kicked in the way it always does, that ability to compartmentalize, to file away the injury for later examination while maintaining operational composure. I smiled. I raised my own glass. I did not let a single crack show in my expression. But inside, I was cataloging every face, every uncomfortable shift, every guest who looked away rather than meet my eyes. The older gentleman near the rose bushes who winced at Patricia's words. Marcus's cousin Bradley, smirking into his champagne with his proper wife beside him. Aunt Denise, still chuckling, dabbing at her eyes as if Patricia had delivered the comedy performance of the year. And Marcus, my Marcus, who knew exactly who I was, who had served under my command before he'd ever held my hand, who had seen me make decisions that saved lives, including his own, though his mother would never know that. His jaw was tight, and I could see him fighting the urge to stand up, to defend me, to tell everyone exactly who they were laughing at. I pressed my thumb against his palm, our signal, stand down, not now. Because the truth was, I didn't want to win that way. I didn't want Patricia to respect me because of my rank or my commendations or the classified missions that would never appear in any newspaper. I wanted her to see me, just me, and decide I was enough for her son. But as I watched her accept congratulations on her clever little toast, as I listened to Aunt Denise call me, the sailor girlfriend to another guest, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more permanent. recognition. I had spent 12 years in the United States Navy learning to read people under pressure, learning when diplomacy would work and when it wouldn't, learning when to extend an olive branch and when to accept that some battles could not be avoided. Patricia Webb had declared war. She just didn't know who she declared it against. The engagement party wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment I stopped pretending I couldn't see what was happening. The first time I met Patricia Webb, I was still wearing the salt in my hair from a 3-week deployment. Marcus had picked me up from the naval base in San Diego, and before I could even shower and change, he'd driven me directly to his parents' home for Sunday dinner. He was excited, nervous, eager to introduce the woman he loved to the family he adored. I should have recognized the trap even then. Patricia had orchestrated it perfectly, ensuring I would arrive windswept and exhausted while she presided over her pristine dining room in silk and pearls. She looked me up and down the way a commanding officer inspects a recruit who's failed inspection. Then she smiled, and that smile would become familiar to me over the following months. It never reached her eyes. "So you're the Navy girl," she said. Not a question, a classification. "Yes, ma'am, Commander Elise Thornton." I extended my hand. She took it limply, briefly, then turned away. "Marcus, darling, help me in the kitchen. Elise can make herself comfortable." That was the first time she left me standing alone in a room full of Webb family photographs. I studied them while I waited. Marcus through the years, from gap-toothed child to handsome teenager to the man I loved. His father, who had passed 3 years earlier. His sister, who lived in London and rarely visited. And Patricia, always positioned at the center of every frame, the sun around which her family orbited. I wasn't in any of those photographs, of course. I never would be. Over dinner, she asked me exactly one question about myself. "But what will you do when you're married?" She said it the way you might ask a child what they want to be when they grow up, indulgent and slightly amused, as if my answer couldn't possibly matter. I told her I would continue my career, that the Navy was my life, my calling, the place where I had found purpose after losing everything else. She nodded politely and changed the subject to her friend's daughter, who had just married a surgeon and was already expecting her first child. Marcus apologized in the car afterward. He kept apologizing for months. The thing is, I understood Patricia Webb better than she knew. I recognized her because I had seen her type before, in briefing rooms and aboard carriers, and in the halls of the Pentagon. People who measured others by what they could extract from them. People who saw relationships as transactions and love as leverage. People who smiled while they calculated exactly how much you were worth to them. Patricia had looked at me and seen nothing of value. A woman without family connections, without money, without the kind of beauty that opens doors in her world. Just a girl who joined the Navy because she had no better options. A placeholder until someone more suitable came along for her precious son. She never asked what I did out there. She just assumed she already knew. What she didn't know, what Marcus had agreed to let me reveal in my own time, was that her placeholder had risen to the rank of commander by the age of 34. That I had led a destroyer escort group through contested waters in the South China Sea. That I had received commendations for leadership during a humanitarian crisis in the Philippines that saved over 1,000 civilian lives. That the Secretary of the Navy knew my name. And there was more, things I couldn't tell her even if I wanted to. Classified operations that would never appear in any file she could access. A rescue mission in the Pacific 18 months ago that I still dreamed about some nights, the weight of those decisions pressing down on me in the dark. I had saved 189 lives that night, including the life of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, though he'd been unconscious for most of it and hadn't known until weeks later that the woman who pulled his ship from the fire was the same woman he'd been exchanging letters with for 2 years. That's how we fell in love, actually, through letters. Old-fashioned paper letters that he'd started sending after we met at a joint training exercise. He wrote to me about books and philosophy and his fears about living up to his father's memory. I wrote back about the loneliness of command, about the weight of being responsible for lives, about how the ocean at night was the most beautiful and terrible thing I'd ever seen. By the time we met again in person, we already knew each other's souls. When Marcus proposed, he asked me something unusual. He asked if we could let his family get to know Elise before they met Commander Thornton. His mother was difficult, he said. That word again. She would feel intimidated if she knew my rank. She would feel competitive. Better to let her see the woman first, the one who loved her son, the one who made him laugh and challenged him and held him when he missed his father. I agreed because I loved him, because I believed that titles and ranks shouldn't matter when two people were building a life together, because I was naive enough to think that Patricia Webb would eventually see in me what her son saw. 6 months, that's how long I gave her. 6 months of Sunday dinners where she talked over me and around me and through me. 6 months of watching her forget to include me in family photographs. 6 months of being introduced to her friends as Marcus's friend from work, as if we weren't planning a wedding. 6 months of comments about how deployment would mean I'd abandon Marcus, how military marriages never lasted, how those Navy women always prioritized their careers over their families. I sat through all of it. I smiled and nodded and helped clear dishes and complimented her cooking. I told myself that patience was a virtue, that she would come around, that eventually she would see past her prejudices and recognize that I loved her son with everything I had. Marcus watched me endure it, and I know it killed him. More than once, he offered to tell his mother the truth, to explain exactly who she was disrespecting, but I always stopped him. Because here's what Patricia never understood about me, what she couldn't see past her own assumptions. I wasn't hiding my rank because I was ashamed of it. I was hiding it because I didn't think it should matter. I had been underestimated my whole life. Growing up without a father, losing my mother to cancer when I was 22, joining the Navy with nothing but a high school diploma and a desperate need to belong somewhere. I had clawed my way up through sheer determination, and I had done it without ever demanding recognition. My sailors knew what I was worth. My commanding officers knew what I was worth. The Navy knew what I was worth. Why should I need Patricia Webb to know too? My mother would have understood. She was a quiet woman, a strong woman, a woman who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and never complained about the unfairness of it. She taught me that dignity wasn't something others gave you. It was something you carried inside yourself, unassailable, untouchable by anyone else's opinion. When she died, the Navy became my family. My crew became my brothers and sisters. My ship became my home. And now Marcus was becoming my future, the person I wanted to build a life with, the man who saw all of me and loved every piece. If his mother couldn't see that, the loss was hers. But the engagement party changed something. Maybe it was the public nature of it, the way she had gathered an audience for my humiliation. Maybe it was Aunt Denise's laughter, or Bradley's smirk, or the way Patricia had looked at me afterward with such satisfaction, as if she'd won some invisible contest. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of being patient, tired of being understanding, tired of watching the people who mattered to me bite their tongues on my behalf. I had spent 12 years in the Navy. I had faced enemy vessels and raging storms and the darkest nights imaginable. I had held dying sailors in my arms and made impossible choices and lived with the weight of command. I would not let one small woman in a Chanel suit defeat me. The letter arrived 6 weeks before the wedding. I found it in our mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, cream-colored envelope, Patricia's monogrammed stationery. I knew before I opened it that something had shifted. She had never written to me directly before. Every communication had gone through Marcus, as if speaking to me without a buffer would somehow contaminate her. I stood in our kitchen and read it twice. Then I sat down at the table and read it a 3rd time, letting each word sink in fully. "Dear Elise," it began, and I almost laughed at the formality. She had never called me dear in person. I have spent many sleepless nights considering how to express my feelings about this upcoming marriage. I have tried to be supportive. I have tried to welcome you into our family, but I find that I cannot, in good conscience, stand by and watch my son make what I believe to be a terrible mistake. The letter went on for 2 pages. She wrote about Marcus's future, his potential, his need for a partner who would support his ambitions rather than pursue her own. She wrote about the instability of military marriages, citing statistics she had clearly researched specifically for this purpose. She wrote about children, about how they deserved a mother who would be present, not one who disappeared for months at a time to play soldier on boats. That phrase again, play soldier on boats. As if everything I had sacrificed, everything I had achieved, was nothing more than a child's game of pretend. The final paragraph was the knife. A woman who plays soldier on boats will never be the wife my son deserves. I will not attend this wedding. I will not pretend to celebrate a union that I believe will bring nothing but heartache to my family. Perhaps one day, when you have tired of your adventures and are ready to be a real wife, we can revisit this conversation. Until then, I think it's best if we maintain our distance. She signed it simply Patricia, no warmth, no closing salutation. Just her name like a stamp of finality. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift across the kitchen floor. Long enough for my coffee to go cold. Long enough for the initial shock to fade into something else, something that felt almost like relief. Because here's the truth. Part of me had been waiting for this. Part of me had known, from that very first Sunday dinner, that Patricia Webb would never accept me. I had spent 6 months trying to prove myself to a woman who had already made up her mind before she ever learned my name. And now, finally, she had made her position clear. There would be no more pretending, no more false smiles across dinner tables, no more hoping that this time, maybe, she would see something in me worth respecting. Marcus found me there when he came home from the base. He read the letter standing up, and I watched his face cycle through the same stages I had experienced. Confusion, disbelief, and then anger, pure and bright and absolutely incandescent. "I'm done," he said. His voice was shaking. "I'm done with her, Elise. She doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to treat you this way and still call herself my mother." "Marcus." "No," he crumpled the letter in his fist. "I've watched her hurt you for 6 months. I've watched you smile and nod and pretend it didn't matter, and I've hated myself for letting it happen. But this is the end. I'll call her right now and tell her that if she can't respect the woman I love, she's not welcome in our lives. Period." I stood up and took his hands, feeling the rage trembling through him. This was the man I loved. The man who would burn bridges with his own family to defend my honor. The man who knew exactly who I was and loved me not despite it, but because of it. "Let me think," I said quietly. "Just give me a day to think." He didn't want to. I could see it in his eyes, the desperate need to act, to fix, to protect. But he nodded, because he trusted me. Because 12 years in the Navy had taught me that the best decisions were rarely made in the heat of anger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed and stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of the past 6 months. Every slight, every dismissal. Every moment when I had chosen silence over confrontation, patience over pride. I had told myself it was wisdom. Now I wondered if it had simply been fear. Not fear of Patricia Webb. I had faced down far more formidable opponents. Fear of something else. Fear of being seen as aggressive, as unfeminine, as the kind of woman Patricia accused me of being. Fear of confirming every stereotype about military women that she had already decided to believe. I had spent my entire career proving that strength and grace could coexist. That a woman could command a ship and still be soft when softness was called for. That authority didn't require cruelty, that power didn't preclude compassion. But somewhere along the way, I had confused grace with submission. I had let Patricia Webb treat me like less than I was because I was afraid that fighting back would make me something I didn't want to be. The phone call came the next afternoon. I recognized the number immediately. Naval Station San Diego. Specifically, the office of Rear Admiral Catherine Morse, my mentor, the woman who had shepherded my career since I was a wide-eyed lieutenant with more ambition than sense. "Commander Thornton." Her voice was warm but businesslike, the way it always was. "I heard something interesting through the grapevine, something about your wedding." My stomach tightened. "Admiral, I'm not sure what you've heard." "I heard that your future mother-in-law has decided not to attend. I heard that she believes you're not good enough for her son because of your service to this country. A pause. I also heard that you've been hiding your rank from his family for 6 months. Is that true? I closed my eyes. It's complicated, ma'am. It always is. Another pause, longer this time. Elise, you know I don't usually involve myself in personal matters, but I've watched you grow from a talented young officer into one of the finest commanders I've ever served with. I was there when you received your commendation. I was there when you led that rescue mission in the Pacific. I know exactly what you're worth, and I'll be damned if some society woman in a designer suit gets to tell you otherwise. I felt my throat tighten. Admiral, who's walking you down the aisle? The question caught me off guard. No one. My mother passed away and my father was never in the picture. I was going to walk alone. No, Admiral Morse said firmly. You're not. If that woman won't see who you are, Commander, let me show her. Let me walk you down that aisle in full dress whites. Let me bring an honor guard of the sailors who served under you. Let me show her exactly what kind of woman her son had the good sense to choose. I couldn't speak for a moment. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that it took my breath away. This isn't about revenge, the Admiral continued, her voice softer now. It's about honor, your honor. You've earned the right to be recognized, Elise. You've earned the right to walk into your wedding as exactly who you are. And if that woman can't handle it well, that's her problem to solve. I thought about Patricia's letter. I thought about 6 months of careful silence. I thought about my mother, who had taught me that dignity was something you carried inside yourself. But my mother had also taught me something else. She had taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let people see exactly who you were. Yes, I said quietly. Yes, Admiral, I would be honored. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, the California sun painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. I stood at the window of the bridal suite and watched the grounds of the venue come to life below me. Staff members arranging chairs, florists making final adjustments to the arrangements, caterers wheeling carts toward the reception hall. And then, in the parking area, the first black SUV arrived. It was subtle at first, just one vehicle with navy plates pulling into a spot near the back, then another, and another. Within an hour, there were a dozen of them, sleek and official, lined up like a silent formation. Chief Petty Officer Rivera had outdone herself. When Admiral Morse told her about the plan, she had taken it upon herself to organize an honor guard that would make even the most decorated brass proud. Sailors I had served with over the years, some of them traveling from as far as Virginia to be here. Men and women who had stood watch beside me through long nights at sea. Officers who had learned their craft under my command. They began filtering into the venue in their dress whites, crisp and perfect, and I watched from my window as the first whispers started among the early arriving guests. My own family section would be sparse. A few distant cousins I barely knew, some friends from the academy, but Marcus's side was supposed to be overflowing with Webbs and extended relatives and his mother's society friends. I wondered how many of them would actually show, given Patricia's very public stance on the wedding. The answer came around 11, when the guest cars began arriving in earnest. Patricia had apparently decided that boycotting the wedding entirely would reflect poorly on her. Or perhaps Marcus had finally gotten through to her during their heated phone calls over the past week. Either way, she pulled up in her silver Mercedes precisely 30 minutes before the ceremony, dressed in a mother-of-the-groom ensemble that probably cost more than my first car. I watched her step out and pause, taking in the unusual number of uniformed personnel milling about. Even from 3 stories up, I could see the slight stiffening of her spine, the way her smile flickered and then reset. She wasn't the only one who noticed. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view as Patricia made her way toward the venue entrance. She stopped twice to speak with other guests, and both times I saw her gesture toward the sailors with barely concealed annoyance. "A bit much," I could almost hear her saying. "So theatrical. You know how military people can be." Aunt Denise arrived minutes later, immediately gravitating to Patricia's side like a satellite finding its orbit. They huddled together near the rose garden, heads bent in conversation, and I didn't need to hear them to know what they were discussing. But here's the thing about the Navy. We know how to execute a plan. The guests trickling in had no idea what was coming. They saw the dress whites and assumed it was simply a military wedding, perhaps more formal than most, but nothing out of the ordinary. They didn't notice the way the sailors positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the venue. They didn't see Chief Rivera coordinating quietly with the venue staff or Admiral Morse arriving through a side entrance, her uniform hidden beneath a long coat. Even Marcus didn't know the full extent of what we'd planned. He knew the Admiral was walking me down the aisle. He knew there would be an honor guard. But the rest of it, the choreography, the timing, the sheer scale of what was about to happen, that was a surprise I was keeping for everyone. A knock at my door pulled me from the window. "Come in." My friend Sarah entered, already dressed in her bridesmaid gown, her eyes wide. "Elise, have you looked outside? There are Navy people everywhere. Like, everywhere. I just saw a guy with more medals than I've ever seen in my life walk past the catering tent." I smiled. "I know." "You know," she stared at me. "What exactly is happening? Because this feels like way more than a normal military wedding." "It's a long story." "We have time. The ceremony doesn't start for another." She glanced at her watch and paled. "Actually, we don't have time. We need to get you dressed. Oh my God, we need to get you dressed right now." The next hour passed in a blur of silk and lace and hairpins and mascara. My wedding gown was simple by most standards, elegant ivory, fitted bodice, flowing skirt. But it was exactly what I'd always imagined. My mother's pearl necklace rested against my collarbone, and pinned just below it, small but unmistakable, was my Navy insignia. The makeup artist finished my eyes and stepped back to admire her work. "You look beautiful," she said. "Absolutely stunning." I studied my reflection in the mirror. I did look beautiful. But more than that, I looked like myself. Not the diminished version of myself that Patricia had tried to create. Not the little Navy friend or the sailor girlfriend. Just me, Commander Elise Thornton, a woman who had earned her place in this world. Another knock at the door, and this time it was Chief Rivera. "Ma'am," she said, and even in this context, she couldn't help the formality. "It's almost time. Admiral Morse is in position. The honor guard is ready. And," she hesitated, a flicker of something like amusement crossing her face, "Mrs. Webb is asking questions." "What kind of questions?" She cornered one of our guys near the gift table and demanded to know who Commander Thornton was. He told her it was the bride. She seemed confused. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment I had been building toward without even knowing it for 6 months. "What did she do?" She went very pale and asked if he was joking. He assured her he wasn't. Then she asked to see the seating chart, and when she saw the Admiral's name listed, Rivera's professional composure cracked just slightly into a grin. Let's just say she needed to sit down. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even triumph, but what I actually felt was simpler than that. I felt ready. "Tell the Admiral I'll be down in 5 minutes." Rivera nodded and disappeared. I took one last look in the mirror, adjusted my mother's pearls, and turned to Sarah. "How do I look?" "Like someone I really wouldn't want to mess with." She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "Elise, I've known you for 15 years. I knew you were impressive, but I don't think I fully understood until today. All those people out there, they're here for you. They traveled from all over the country to honor you on your wedding day." "They're my family," I said simply. "The only real family I've had since my mother died." The walk from the bridal suite to the ceremony staging area felt like a transition between worlds. With every step, I shed another layer of the woman Patricia Webb thought she knew. The quiet, accommodating girlfriend who smiled through insults and swallowed her pride. The boat girl who was just playing at a career until something better came along. By the time I reached Admiral Morse, I was entirely myself again. She stood near the doors that led to the ceremony space, resplendent in her dress whites, her chest adorned with rows of medals and ribbons that told the story of a career spanning 4 decades. She had commanded aircraft carriers and task forces. She had advised presidents. She had broken barriers that women before her could only dream of. And today, she was here for me. "Commander Thornton," she said, her voice soft but carrying that unmistakable note of authority. "You look magnificent." "Thank you, Admiral, for all of this. I don't know how to." She held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me after you've seen your mother-in-law's face." A laugh escaped me, surprising us both. It felt strange to laugh here on the precipice of everything, but it also felt right. Through the closed doors, I could hear the murmur of guests settling into their seats. The string quartet that Patricia had insisted on was playing something classical and forgettable. And somewhere in that room, my future was waiting for me. Marcus, in his own dress whites, ready to spend the rest of his life by my side. But first, his mother was going to learn exactly who I was. Chief Rivera appeared at my elbow. "Honor guard is in position, ma'am, on your signal." I took a deep breath, then another. I thought about my mother, who would have loved this moment. I thought about every sacrifice I had made to get here, every night spent alone at sea, every decision that had weighed on my shoulders like an anchor. Then I thought about Patricia Webb, sitting smugly in the front row, still believing I was nobody. She never asked what I did out there. She just assumed she already knew. "Signal them," I said. "It's time." The string quartet fell silent. A moment of perfect stillness settled over the venue. And then, from somewhere outside, I heard the first notes of Eternal Father, Strong to Save, the Navy hymn, as the doors before me began to open. The doors swung open, and the light from the ceremony space flooded over me like a wave. For a moment, I couldn't see anything but brightness. Then my eyes adjusted, and I took in the scene before me. 200 guests seated in white chairs arranged in perfect rows. Flowers cascading from every surface, the roses and peonies that Marcus and I had chosen together. Afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, catching the crystal chandeliers and scattering rainbows across the walls. And there, at the end of the aisle, Marcus, my Marcus, standing at the altar in his dress whites, his cover tucked under his arm, his eyes already glistening as he watched the doors open. But I wasn't the first thing the guests saw. The honor guard entered before me, 2 columns of sailors in immaculate dress uniforms, their ceremonial swords drawn and raised to form a gleaming arch. They moved with the precision that only years of drill and discipline could produce, each footstep landing in perfect synchronization with the music. The Navy hymn swelled through the space, its familiar melody filling every corner of the room. I had heard it hundreds of times over my career, at funerals and commissionings, at changes of command and memorial services. But I had never heard it played for me, for my wedding, for my moment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could see heads turning, guests rising slightly in their seats to get a better look at the spectacle unfolding before them. The Webb family section, front row left, had gone utterly still. Admiral Morse offered me her arm. "Ready, Commander." I placed my hand on her forearm, feeling the crisp fabric of her uniform beneath my fingers. "Ready, Admiral." We stepped forward together. The aisle seemed to stretch for miles, though I knew it was only 50 feet at most. Every step felt weighted with meaning. Every breath felt like a declaration. I kept my eyes forward, my posture straight, my bearing exactly what 12 years of naval service had taught me it should be. But I was aware of everything. I was aware of the sailors on either side of me, their swords catching the light, their faces set in expressions of formal respect. I was aware of the guests watching, some of them dabbing at their eyes, others simply staring in open amazement. I was aware of the music surrounding us, sacred and solemn and powerful. And I was aware of Patricia Webb. She sat in the front row, exactly where a mother of the groom should sit. She was wearing dusty rose, an elegant color that she had probably chosen specifically to complement the wedding palette. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was perfect. Her posture, usually so impeccable, had crumbled. She was staring at Admiral Morse. Specifically, she was staring at the medals on Admiral Morse's chest. The ribbons, the stars on her shoulder boards, the unmistakable insignia of a flag officer in the United States Navy. I watched Patricia's face cycle through a series of expressions. First, confusion, as if she was trying to reconcile what she was seeing with what she thought she knew. Then recognition, slow and dawning, as the pieces began to fall into place. Then something else, something that looked almost like fear. Aunt Denise sat beside her, champagne glass clutched in white-knuckled fingers. She was whispering something to Patricia, but Patricia wasn't listening. Patricia couldn't look away from the procession moving toward her. We reached the halfway point of the aisle, and I heard the officiant's voice ring out across the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise." The rustle of 200 people standing in unison, the creak of chairs, the soft sounds of surprise and awe. Escorted by Rear Admiral Catherine Morse, United States Navy, we are honored to present Commander Elise Thornton, United States Navy. The gasps were audible this time. Real gasps, the kind that come from genuine shock, from the sudden shattering of assumptions and expectations. "Commander." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. I saw it register on faces throughout the crowd. Guests who had known me only as Marcus's quiet fiancé. Colleagues of Patricia's who had heard her stories about the sailor girlfriend. Family members who had nodded along when Patricia called me the boat girl. Commander Elise Thornton. I kept walking. Step by step, sword arch overhead, Admiral Morse steady and proud beside me. I didn't look at Patricia again. I didn't need to. I knew what I would see there, and this moment wasn't about her. This moment was about me and Marcus and the life we were building together. The sailors lining the aisle saluted as I passed. Each one. A crisp, perfect salute held until I had moved beyond them. These were the men and women who had served under my command, who had trusted me with their lives in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, who had watched me make impossible decisions and had followed me anyway. Chief Rivera stood at the end of the formation, and as I approached, I saw tears streaming down her weathered face. She had been with me for 8 years. She had been on that destroyer when everything went wrong, when the fire broke out and the ship started taking on water, and everyone thought they were going to die. She had watched me save them. Now she was watching me walk toward my future, and the pride in her eyes was almost more than I could bear. The last few steps were a blur. I was aware of releasing Admiral Morse's arm, of turning to face her for a final exchange. "Thank you, Admiral," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "For everything." She clasped my hand briefly. "It's been my honor, Commander, truly." Then lower, so only I could hear, "Now go marry that man before he passes out from crying." I almost laughed. Instead, I turned to face Marcus. He was a wreck. A beautiful, wonderful, completely undone wreck. Tears were streaming down his face, and he wasn't even trying to hide them. His dress whites were perfect, his bearing was military straight, but his expression was pure, unfiltered love. "Hey, sailor," I whispered as I stepped up beside him. "Hey yourself, Commander." He took my hands, and his were trembling. "You know, when you said the wedding might have some surprises, this wasn't exactly what I pictured." Disappointed. "Are you kidding?" He glanced past me at the honor guard, at Admiral Morse taking her seat in the front row, at the 200 guests still standing in stunned silence. "Elise, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You're the most incredible thing I've ever seen." Behind us, the officiant cleared his throat gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated." The rustling resumed as guests sank back into their chairs. I caught glimpses of faces as I turned slightly toward the altar. Marcus's Naval Academy friends were beaming, some of them openly laughing with joy. The older gentleman from the rose bushes, the one who had winced at Patricia's engagement party toast, was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. Sarah was clutching her bouquet so tightly the stems were probably bruised. And Patricia. Patricia was sitting absolutely still, her face drained of color, her hands folded in her lap. Aunt Denise was trying to whisper something to her, but Patricia seemed to have gone somewhere far away. Somewhere she was trying to process the fact that everything she thought she knew about me had just been demolished in the space of 3 minutes. The ceremony began. I tried to focus on the words, on the vows Marcus and I had written together. on the rings we exchanged and the promises we made. But part of me was still processing what had just happened, still feeling the echoes of that walk down the aisle reverberating through my bones. I had spent 6 months being small, being quiet, being the version of myself that I thought would be easiest for Patricia to accept. And in 3 minutes, I had shown her who I really was. When the officiant asked Marcus if he took me to be his wife, his voice rang out clear and strong. I do, absolutely, forever. When it was my turn, I looked into his eyes and saw everything I needed. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of California, I am honored to pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Marcus pulled me into his arms and kissed me, and the room erupted. The applause started somewhere in the Navy section and spread like wildfire. Cheering, whistling, the stomp of feet and the clap of hands. My sailors, my family, celebrating with all the enthusiasm they usually reserved for shore leave. When we finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Marcus kept one arm wrapped firmly around my waist. Together, we turned to face the crowd. The honor guard had reformed at the end of the aisle, their swords raised once more to create an arch for our exit. The light caught the blades and turned them into ribbons of silver fire. "Ready?" Marcus asked. I looked at the arch, at the sailors, at the guests still on their feet, still applauding, and at Patricia, who had finally turned to face us, her expression unreadable. "Ready," I said. We walked through the sword arch together, husband and wife, and I felt the ceremonial tap on my back that tradition demanded, the gentle strike of the flat of a blade as I passed the final sailor. "Welcome to the Navy family, Mrs. Webb," the sailor said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Fair winds and following seas." Behind us, I heard a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It took me a moment to realize it was Aunt Denise, dropping her champagne glass. The crystals shattered on the marble floor, and nobody moved to clean it up. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a space that Patricia had originally suggested with the clear expectation that she would preside over it like a queen holding court. Now, as Marcus and I entered to thunderous applause, I saw her standing near the far wall, looking like a woman who had wandered into the wrong party and couldn't find the exit. The first hour passed in a blur of congratulations and embraces. My sailors found me one by one, each of them taking a moment to shake my hand or pull me into a hug. These were people who had seen me at my worst and my best, who had followed me into uncertainty and trusted me to bring them home. Having them here, surrounding me with their loyalty and affection, meant more than any toast Patricia could have given. Marcus stayed close, his hand finding mine whenever the crowd threatened to separate us. He introduced me to distant relatives I'd never met, and I watched their faces shift as they processed the disconnect between what Patricia had told them and what they were seeing with their own eyes. "So you're the boat girl," one elderly uncle said, his eyes twinkling. "Funny, Patricia failed to mention you outranked her son." I smiled. She didn't know. "I suspect she knows now." He chuckled and patted my arm. "Welcome to the family, Commander. God knows we need someone to shake things up." The dinner was served, and speeches began. Marcus's best man, a fellow officer he'd known since Annapolis, told stories of their academy days that had the Navy contingent roaring with laughter. Sarah gave a toast that made me cry, talking about the girl she'd met 15 years ago who had nothing but determination and a dream. And then, during a lull between courses, I saw Patricia approaching. She moved through the crowd like a woman walking to her own execution, each step deliberate and careful. The confidence she'd worn like armor at the engagement party had cracked completely. In its place was something I hadn't expected to see. Uncertainty. She stopped a few feet from our table, and for a long moment, she simply stood there. I could see her struggling to find words, her mouth opening and closing, her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles had gone white. "Elise," she finally said, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to. I don't know how to." I waited. I didn't help her. I didn't make it easier. After 6 months of making things easy for her, of swallowing my pride to smooth her path, I decided she could find her own way through this moment. I didn't know, she said. About your rank, about any of it, I thought. You thought I was nobody, I said quietly, not accusatory, just factual. You thought I was a girl playing dress-up on boats, waiting for something better to come along. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Yes, I thought that. I was wrong. You were. The silence between us stretched thin, fragile as spun glass. Around us, the reception continued, laughter and music and the clink of glasses, but we existed in our own bubble, a space where the past 6 months hung heavy in the air. I read your letter, I said. The one where you called me a woman who plays soldier on boats. The one where you said I would never be the wife your son deserves. Patricia's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw genuine shame there, not the performance of it. I was cruel. I was small and petty and cruel, and I don't have any excuse for it. No, I agreed. You don't. She took a shaky breath. I saw someone taking my son away from me, someone who would always have one foot out the door, ready to leave him behind for some adventure on the other side of the world. I didn't see you. I only saw what I was afraid of. I considered that. I considered the woman standing before me, stripped of her pretensions, forced to confront the consequences of her assumptions. Part of me wanted to let her twist in the wind. Part of me remembered every slight, every dismissal, every moment she had made me feel like less than I was. But another part of me remembered something else. The way Marcus talked about her when she wasn't present, the complicated love he still carried for his mother despite everything. The grief she'd never fully processed after losing her husband. The fear that drove her cruelty, the desperate need to hold onto her son in the only way she knew how. I could be right, or I could be kind. In that moment, I chose to be both. You never asked what I did out there, I said. You never asked about my career, my achievements, my life before Marcus. You just assumed you already knew. She nodded miserably. I know I did. But here's what you really missed, Patricia. I leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze. You missed the fact that I love your son more than I love anything else in this world. You missed the fact that I have spent my entire career protecting the people I care about. You missed the fact that leaving Marcus is the last thing I would ever do, because I know what it means to lose everyone you love. Her eyes widened, and I saw the moment she understood. The moment she finally looked at me and saw not a rival, not a threat, but a woman who had lost her own mother and had built a family from nothing. I didn't want your respect because of my rank, I continued. I wanted you to see me, just me, the person your son fell in love with, the person who writes him letters and makes him laugh and holds him when he misses his father. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face now, cutting tracks through her carefully applied makeup. You could have had that, I said. You could have had a daughter. Instead, you spent 6 months trying to drive me away. I'm sorry. The words came out broken, jagged. I'm so sorry, Elise. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I am sorry. I looked at this woman who had made my life difficult for half a year, who had mocked my service, dismissed my worth, tried to convince her son I wasn't good enough, who had written a letter calling me a boat girl and refused to attend my wedding. And I made a choice. Forgiveness takes time, I said. Trust takes longer. But I'm not going anywhere, Patricia. I'm going to be in your life for the rest of it, whether you like it or not. So we can either figure out how to be family, or we can spend the next 40 years making each other miserable. I paused. I've had enough misery. How about you? She stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. I don't deserve your kindness, she whispered. No, I agreed. But your son does. And he loves you even when you make it very difficult to understand why. A sound that was half laugh, half sob escaped her. He gets that from his father, that stubborn loyalty. I know. It's one of the things I love most about him. Behind me, I heard Admiral Morse's voice, quiet but carrying. Your son chose a woman who saved his life and 189 others. I hope you learn to deserve her. Patricia's head snapped up, her eyes finding the Admiral. Saved his. What do you mean? I hadn't planned to tell her. The mission was classified, and even if it weren't, I hadn't wanted to use it as leverage. But Admiral Morse had made the decision for me. The Pacific Rescue Mission, I said quietly. 18 months ago, the destroyer that caught fire took on water, the one that almost went down with all hands. Patricia's face went pale. Marcus was on that ship. He told me there was an accident, that they almost didn't make it, but... The commanding officer who led the rescue, who organized the evacuation and kept everyone calm while the ship was sinking, who personally pulled 6 sailors out of the water, including a lieutenant commander who had been knocked unconscious by a falling beam. I met her eyes. That was me, Patricia. I saved your son's life. And I did it before I ever knew his name, before we ever met in person, before I had any idea that I would fall in love with him. She swayed on her feet. For a moment, I thought she might actually faint. Aunt Denise materialized at her elbow, reaching out to steady her. "Oh my God," Patricia breathed. "Oh my God, all this time, all the things I said." "All this time," I confirmed. "You were insulting the woman who brought your son home." The irony of it seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She pressed her hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I simply let the truth sit between us, heavy and undeniable. "I think," Patricia said finally, her voice barely audible, "I need to sit down." Aunt Denise led her away, shooting me a look that was equal parts respect and terror. I watched them go, feeling Marcus's hand settle on my shoulder. "That was generous," he said softly, "more generous than she deserved." "Maybe," I turned to face him, "but she's your mother, and I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere. We might as well figure out how to make this work." He pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "Have I mentioned lately that you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met?" "You could mention it more often." "Commander Thornton, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met." He grinned. "Also, I think you broke my aunt. She looks like she's seen a ghost." I glanced over at Aunt Denise, who was indeed staring at me from across the room with an expression of shell-shocked wonder. When she caught me looking, she quickly turned away. "She'll recover," I said. "They all will, or they won't. Either way, I'm done pretending to be less than I am." The rest of the reception passed in a kind of golden haze. The band played songs that made people dance. The cake was cut with Marcus's ceremonial sword, and my sailors taught the Webb family relatives drinking songs that would probably never be repeated in polite company again. I gave my speech during the toasts, and I meant every word of it. "When I was 22 years old," I said, standing at the microphone with Marcus's hand warm in mine, "I lost my mother. She was the only family I had, and when she was gone, I thought I would never belong anywhere again. I joined the Navy because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I stayed because I found something I never expected to find. A family." I looked out at the room, at the dress whites scattered among the civilian formal wear, at the faces of people who had followed me into danger and trusted me to bring them home. "The people in this room," I continued, "the sailors who traveled from across the country to be here today, my admiral who honored me by walking me down the aisle. They never had to ask who I am. They never had to wonder what I was worth. They were there. They saw. They knew." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Some people never asked what I did out there. They assumed they knew. But the people in this room, my crew, my admiral, my husband, they never had to ask. They were there. The applause that followed felt different from the cheering after the ceremony. This was quieter, more thoughtful. I saw Chief Rivera wiping her eyes again. I saw Admiral Morse nodding with quiet approval. And I saw Patricia, sitting at the family table, tears streaming down her face as she finally began to understand the magnitude of what she had almost lost. After the speeches, after the dancing, after Marcus and I had made the rounds thanking every guest personally, the time came to leave. The hour was late, the champagne was running low, and our honeymoon flight departed early the next morning. The honor guard had reassembled outside, forming one final arch of swords to see us off. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of roses from the garden. Stars scattered across the California sky like diamonds on velvet. As we walked toward the waiting car, I heard footsteps behind us. Quick, purposeful, almost desperate. "Elise, please wait." I turned to find Patricia hurrying across the flagstones, her heels clicking against the stone. She had aged 10 years in the course of a single evening. The careful facade she had maintained for so long had crumbled completely, revealing a woman who was smaller and more fragile than I had ever realized. "I won't keep you," she said, slightly breathless. I needed to say something before you left." Marcus tensed beside me, protective even now, but I squeezed his hand gently. It was all right. I could handle this. "Go ahead," I said. Patricia took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, I noticed. The perfectly manicured fingers that had always seemed so steady were trembling like leaves in a storm. "I was wrong," she said. "About everything. About who you are, about what you do, about whether you were good enough for my son." She laughed bitterly. "Good enough, my God. You saved his life, and I was questioning whether you were good enough." "Patricia." "No, please, let me finish." She pressed her hands together as if in prayer. "I spent 6 months treating you like an obstacle to be overcome, like a problem to be solved. I never once stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, my son had found exactly the partner he needed. Someone strong enough to match him. Someone brave enough to love him even when it was hard." She stepped closer, and I saw the sincerity in her eyes. Not performance, not social maneuvering, real, painful honesty. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "I know that, but I want you to know that I see you now. Finally. Not the commander, not the rank, not the medals, you, the woman who loves my son, the woman who would die for the people she cares about." Her voice cracked. "The woman who saved him when I couldn't." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the armor I had worn for so long around this woman. It didn't mean I trusted her. It didn't mean the wounds she had inflicted were healed, but it meant something. "I didn't need you to know my rank to treat me with respect," I said quietly. "But maybe now you understand why your son loves me." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I do. God help me, I finally do." For a moment, we simply stood there, two women who had been at war without ever formally declaring it. Then Patricia did something I never expected. She stepped forward and pulled me into an embrace. It was awkward, stiff. Neither of us quite knew how to hold the other, but it was real and it was a beginning. "Take care of him," she whispered against my ear. "Always," I promised. When she released me, her makeup was ruined and her composure was in tatters, but she looked more human than I had ever seen her. She turned to Marcus, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for choosing her, for having the courage to love someone extraordinary." Marcus's eyes glistened. "Thanks, Mom." She kissed his cheek, then stepped back, composing herself with visible effort. "Go, enjoy your honeymoon. We'll talk more when you get back." The car was waiting, engine purring softly. As Marcus opened the door for me, I took one last look at the scene behind us. The honor guard standing at attention. Admiral Morse watching from the entrance with a knowing smile. Chief Rivera giving me a thumbs up that was decidedly unmilitary but deeply appreciated. And Patricia, standing alone on the flagstones, watching her son leave with the woman she had finally learned to see. I slid into the car, and Marcus climbed in beside me. The door closed, sealing us in our own private world. Through the tinted windows, I watched the estate recede as we pulled away. "Well," Marcus said, taking my hand, "that was definitely not the wedding I imagined when I proposed." Disappointed. Not even slightly. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles. "Although I think my mother might need therapy." "Your mother needs a lot of things. Therapy might be a good start." He laughed, and the sound filled the car with warmth. "Are you okay? That was a lot back there. The ceremony, my mother, all of it." I considered the question seriously. Was I okay? I had spent 6 months being dismissed and diminished. I had walked into my wedding not knowing if my future mother-in-law would even show up. I had revealed my true self to a room full of people who had been told I was nobody. And yet I had also been honored by my admiral, celebrated by my sailors, married to the love of my life. And I had faced Patricia Webb on my own terms, with my own power, and I had chosen grace over vengeance. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm okay, better than okay, actually." Marcus smiled, and in that smile I saw everything I had ever wanted. A partner who knew me, a future full of possibility, a love that had survived distance and danger and even his mother. "She thought loving a Navy woman meant loving someone who would leave," I said softly, watching the lights of the estate disappear behind us. "She'll learn it means loving someone who always comes back." Marcus pulled me close, and I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my cheek. Outside, the California night streamed past, stars wheeling overhead, the whole world opening up before us. We had a honeymoon to take, a life to build, a future to write together. And I would face all of it the same way I faced everything else, with the quiet strength of a woman who had learned that true power doesn't come from rank or title or recognition. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and never apologizing for it. Commander Elise Thornton Webb, United States Navy. Wife, sailor, survivor. Finally, truly myself.